Hey everyone, it's Samuel. And welcome to Plot Hooks, the podcast where we explore the arts of narrative and collaborative storytelling in the world's premier RPG, Dungeons & Dragons. Today in the Prime Material, life doesn't care about your level. In the wilds, the weretiger. And in the tavern, what would you do if the party had to participate in a sports competition? Well, how's it going today, everyone? I hope everybody out there is having an excellent day. Excited to dive into a little bit of a cryptic topic, as I'm sure you could tell by the title. Life doesn't care about your level. But we'll get into exactly what I mean by this and how it has to do with role-playing in a little bit. Before we get into it, though, some announcements to get out of the way. Remember to follow us on all our social media. You can find us at Plot Hooks on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to stay tuned because tomorrow, as of the release of this podcast, that'll be Sunday, April 11th, we'll be releasing Plot Hooks' new logo. We're so pumped to begin rolling that out for you all. It is an awesome piece of art, which is very simple, and it really stays true to the classic look that Plot Hooks has always had, but it branches out a little bit and kind of reflects a little bit better, we think, the whole vision for Plot Hooks that we have. We want to help people come into this amazing hobby of collaborative storytelling and to really provide resources for everyone to be able to do it well and for people to continue to learn. And we think this new logo really just takes the best parts of the old, adds in that fresh vision, and I think just is an awesome new logo. So again, be looking for that tomorrow, Sunday, April 11th. As far as other announcements, keep checking out Disaster Hamsters. We are actually incredibly close to Copper Bestseller on the DM's Guild. Thank you all so much for your support. And don't forget about Oath of Destiny, our first release, the Paladin subclass, which is up there. And now that we kind of have some of the kinks ironed out with the releases and such, I'm going to be trying to go back and actually update that release, create an accessible version for that as well, and just edit a couple of things here and there, just to really polish it up whenever time permits. Be sure to rate and review all of our content wherever you happen to get it, both our podcasts on things like Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but also be sure to rate and review Disaster Hamsters and our DM's Guild supplements. It really helps us out. Thank you so much. And finally, we'd appreciate it if you could check out our Patreon. Whenever you support us on Patreon, you help us make the podcast better each and every day. And not only the podcast, but now this entire creative network. Depending on what tier you get access to, you'll get perks like a magic item every week, a character concept every week, the ability to suggest various things for the podcast, a shout out on the show, appearing on the YouTube graphics for the uploads of the show on there. And more will be coming out soon as we're trying to work through exactly how to refine and alter our Patreon to make it more reflective of what we do each day and to give more benefits to those who may want to support. But we genuinely appreciate each and every one of you. Even if you're just a listener, that is a great help and support as well. Rating and reviewing is great. Telling a friend is great. We just genuinely appreciate each and every one of you that has become part of the Plot Hooks family. And of course, I guess I just realized, I don't think we've announced this on the podcast yet, but we hit 1,000 followers on Twitter. We completed the quest for 1K. We're at 1,021 as of this recording. Again, just thank you all so much for your support. This community is amazing, and we love telling stories and talking about telling stories with all of you. But, without any further ado, let's get into this rather cryptic topic. Life doesn't care about your level. What do I mean by that? Well, to explain, let's look to an unlikely place. A quote from Harold Ramis in Knocked Up. Harold Ramis was a famous Hollywood actor and writer, known especially for comedy. He co-wrote and had a part in Ghostbusters. He co-wrote and directed Groundhog Day. He co-wrote and directed Caddyshack. All those are classic older comedies, at least older by my generation. But he had a small role as Ben's dad in the 2007 movie Knocked Up. And while talking to his son in that movie, he uttered the following line. He said, "Life doesn't care about your vision." And that's an impactful line, if you think about it, especially if you take it out of the context of the movie and just think about it in the abstract. Things often happen in life which we didn't expect, things which we didn't plan for, things which we weren't anticipating. And whenever these things happen, it can change the course of what we had planned to do. We can change where we need to live. It can change what kind of job we have. It can change our family situation. Things happen which just change our plans. And the same thing happens in Dungeons & Dragons or any tabletop role-playing game. The chaos of the life of the character that you're playing, the actions of the non-player characters, the randomness of the dice, all of this can change at a moment's notice where you thought that the story was going to go. You may have started out telling one story, but it's a collaborative narrative, and there's lots of different things that are pulling on the story, and all of a sudden, things are happening in this game which you didn't expect, and the story is becoming deeper and more nuanced, and heading in directions which you never would have thought. Except, there's a problem. It's not exactly a pure equivalent. And this is where we have to transition from this line in Knocked Up, life doesn't care about your vision, to our line for the day, life doesn't care about your level. Because in reality, the challenges of life, the things that we don't anticipate, can hit us at any time, whether or not we feel that we're ready for them. The challenges of life don't care about how ready we feel for a situation. In other words, life doesn't care about your level. But in tabletop role-playing games, that's different. DMs and GMs have to intentionally choose to give the party challenges which are appropriate to their level, and they have to actively steer the players away from problems that are either beneath their level or way above their level, all to make sure that the story doesn't get boring or that they don't get over their heads. As we're telling the stories of these characters, we are caring about the level that the character is. We're caring about the party's level as we tell these stories. Now, that's not true necessarily about every single aspect of a tabletop role-playing game, of course, because there are many things which a character could not be ready for in the social arena, or different things like that. There are certainly challenges which could occur that, just like in real life, a character could not be ready for, things which are not level dependent. But in terms of things like combat challenges, dungeons, encountering NPCs even, where they'll have DC difficulties for completing a task with them, like a persuasion check or something like that. Encountering traps. All these things that you can do in the game are level specific. The amount of damage that they'll do, the difficulty class for being able to pass the checks, all of them are level dependent. There's no reason why that Tarrasque waited until level 20 to pop out of the ground. It could have popped out at level 1, but it didn't, because the Dungeon Master was making a level-based decision. Party isn't ready for this terrifying monstrosity. So for the good of the game, I'm not going to throw it in there. I'm not presenting this as a problem, because it's absolutely not. It's an interesting thought exercise, though, because if you're like me, you've never really considered this at all for years as you told stories. And it isn't even an issue that pops up at all unless you're talking about a much longer, fuller campaign where you're going from a low level to a high level and you have these different tiers that you're interacting with. And I think games and systems are built knowing that this reality exists. It's set up to allow you to tell stories that make sense without having to suspend disbelief, without having to think about how life doesn't care about your level in the real world. So it's not a problem. It's just the way things are. But at the same time, it can certainly be handled in a poor manner. And if it is, then it can take us out of the story. And that can hurt our narrative, because then it starts to really enter your mind and stop making sense. It's obviously understood, again, and built into the system that the level of a character matters for the challenges they face, and it's usually perfectly okay. But if the game is managed in a way where this becomes either overtly obvious that this is the case or some other factor, it begins to detract from the story. So to me, this isn't a matter of discussing it as far as like, oh, here's top 5 things to do, and anything like that. Because I think the game is just built to handle these things. It's a really interesting thought exercise, but there's no need to give, top 5 things to do. But at the same time, there are some things that we should try to avoid. Things which could lead down the road of detracting from our experience. Things which call into focus the fact that there's a slight disconnect between the reality of life, that life doesn't care about your level, and the reality of the game mechanics that have to take current character level into account. These things aren't going to be hard and fast rules. We just want to present 3 different things that we should be careful doing as we are trying to make sure that this doesn't become an issue in games. The first thing is, I think we have to be careful of having plot threads dangling obviously out in the open, which are outside of the player's reach. This is, of course, okay to happen in some circumstances. In fact, in some circumstances, it's actually part of the overarching plot. There is something which is going on, like a dragon attack or some major catastrophe, which the party is well aware of the fact that they aren't ready for it, and so that they have to go about the process of obtaining magical items or figuring out how to get something or get stronger in order to actually come back and face the threat. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we have to be careful about having a very obvious plot thread that is completely disenfranchised from any of those other narrative points. It would be like having a dragon attack with no actual way or avenue forward to actually deal with it. It's just, there's a dragon attack. Oh well, y'all guys aren't strong enough yet, so there's just a dragon attack in the distance. the players are going to want to engage in that in some way. But they can't unless you've actually built in a way for them to be able to actually engage with that plot thread at a lower level. There's just no way level 5 players can tangle with an ancient black dragon. And if we have circumstances like this where there are just these plot threads which are just obviously things which the players want to engage with but they can't, then that begins to take you out of that immersion, and then it begins to kind of call into mind the fact that there are things going on in the world which are above my current character's level. And that's frustrating, at least to me. That's how I approach it. Normal course of gameplay happens in the tiers, right? You've got tier 1, levels 1 through 5, tier 2, 6 through 10, tier 3, and so on and so forth. And in each tier, you're kind of going further and further in terms of the different effects that you're having on the world. From things like a local hero to like being well known throughout a country to being all the way up to being a hero of the realm. The game isn't set up for you to throw a bunch of hero of the realm plot hooks in there while they're still in levels 1 to 5, where they just can't really engage with it. To me, that's a recipe for dissatisfaction. Having plot threads which are obviously outside of my character's reach, and me as the player knows that they're outside of my character's reach, but my character doesn't know what's going on, and I really want to engage with that and not just go hunt down bandits. I want to attack the dragon, and it could just lead to some dissatisfaction and just some lack of immersion. So to me, that's one way where this can begin to draw in this whole life doesn't care about your level paradox, so to speak, and begin to detract from the story. The second is related to this, where it's not talking about plot threads specifically, but it's talking about the overarching story scale. And this goes back to the tiers which we just discussed. We shouldn't advance the story scale too quickly unless we have a plan. Sometimes we just go straight into and we put those plot threads in there and we just immediately okay, now these players are all of a sudden really popular with the king, and even though they're only level 2, and now they're being sent all over the realm and all over the world because they're so incredibly powerful, and yet they're only level 2. If you've got a plan for how you're going to do that, then go for it, absolutely. But if you don't, then it can quickly show this problem. Because the king, dealing with his realm-shaking problems, all he can do is send the party after challenge rating 2 creatures. He can't send them after major things. They have this really powerful status in the kingdom, and yet they're not actually able to deal with really powerful threats. I actually encountered this in a game where I played, where we jumped too far ahead too quickly. We were from level 3 to level 4, we actually became really prominent in a particular town because we saved a bunch of people. But we didn't just become like renowned, we became like guild leaders and like started schools and became like rich. And we're these level 3 characters that have all of this status and intelligence and wisdom, and we're just not that far along as a party. And our DM, who was a newish DM at the time, and I was actually a newish player at that time, that was my first ever campaign, we realized just kind of the issue as we were going through and telling our story. And what he decided to do, just to kind of rectify the situation, is he brought in his main villain, which was this shadow dragon, and had it attack the town that we were in, and essentially just destroyed the town and kind of messed up the things which we had built over just that little tiny span of time, and gave us kind of an overarching long-term goal of having this thing which we had to discover why this dragon was here, discover exactly what was giving it its power, and discover how to ultimately beat it. So there are times when you can advance the story scale quickly, but I don't think we should do it unless we have a plan, just to make sure that nothing detracts from the story. So number one, just being careful of having plot threads dangling, which are out of the player's reach. Number two, not advancing the story scale too quickly unless you have a plan. And just finally, we should be careful of having something occur right next to the players, but not to the players, which is beyond their level. A little bit wordy there, but let me explain what I mean. If the party is part of a large-scale battle, for instance, and the party, I'm just going to go back to using our bandits and dragons. Obviously, this is hyperbole here, but just going back to that as an example. If the party is in the middle of this one little portion of the battle and they get to fight this bandit chief and 5 bandits, and both the groups of allies that are near them both are fighting a dragon apiece, it becomes a little obvious that their encounter is pared down because of their level. It's almost calling attention to the fact that they can't fight this thing yet. And of course, it's rarely going to be that overt of like they're literally next to a separate party that is fighting something that's stronger than they are. But having things happen to NPCs or townships or areas that are right near them, but it keeps skirting around them because they can't actually deal with the situation yet because they're not strong enough. Maybe, again, that could be part of an overarching plan, but we have to be careful of that because if we're just doing it just for fun, then it becomes a situation where the perhaps momentary feeling of the party of, oh, that's lucky, just quickly becomes into, yeah, we're just not having to actually fight this thing because we're not strong enough yet, because we're not a high enough level. But ultimately, with this and with all of these things, these are just things to think about. Like I said earlier, it's a good thought exercise, because it's just one of the things about role-playing games which are a little bit different than real life. And so it's worth considering these things to make sure that as we tell our stories together, that we're doing it in a way that's fulfilling for everyone at the table, that's not drawing us out of the narrative or detracting from the story because we're doing it in such a way that it becomes overtly obvious that there's this disconnect here between the reality that life doesn't care about your level and the in-game reality that your level matters. So it's just something to think about. But what do you think? Is this something that you've encountered in your games? Do you have any other things which you avoid in order to make sure that this doesn't become an issue? Do you not think it's an issue at all? We'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Hit us up on social media. But for now, I think that's about all the time we have for the Prime material today. Let's head out to the wilds and look at a lycanthrope. We're out here in the wilds. Today's critter, the weretiger. The weretiger is one of 5 lycanthropic creatures which are listed in the monster manual, alongside the werebear, the wererat, the wereboar, and of course the werewolf. And in Dungeons and Dragons, lycanthropy is a curse. A curse which transforms any humanoid creature into the form of a ravaging beast. This, of course, typically happens under a full moon, and it can transform that entity from its natural humanoid form into either a hybrid between the beast and the humanoid form, or all the way to a bear or wolf or whatever form of beast that the lycanthropy is actually associated with in a particular entity's case. Sometimes this can happen without the entity's knowledge. They can be transforming into something on full moons and have no idea what was actually happening. Sometimes they can control it, given enough experience, and can actually go in and out of these different forms at will, no matter the stage of the moon in the sky. Some try to hide it, trying to fight it and resist it as best they can. Some embrace it, which usually leads to becoming more and more bestial and evil, beginning to prey on others and fall into bloodlust. 3 of the lycanthropes are evil. Their tendencies are actually driving them towards that uncontrolled bloodlust and evil, like the werewolf's classic nature does. However, the werebear and the weretiger, however, are a little bit different. The werebear's actually got a good alignment. The weretiger is just a neutral alignment. They aren't out there trying to be evil or succumb to base instincts and just prey on anyone that passes by. They just retreat generally away from regular communities and live either by themselves or in small groups, living on the fringes of regular humanoid civilization, according to the Monster Manual, typically in jungle-type regions. And I like these creatures because they're great to use in a story. There's so many different ways you can take it. You could have a group of weretigers that the party just comes across in the middle of a jungle. They come across a normal family that just happens to be living out here. They're a little odd and perhaps obsessed with hunting a little bit because the weretigers are traditionally very great and ferocious hunters and warriors. And physically they're imposing as well. They're rather muscular and tall. But they can just come across this family, which seems strange, but just this family living in the middle of nowhere, and the party has to kind of figure out what's going on. Why is this family in the middle of the jungle? What exactly is going on? And they just kind of unravel this mystery, and maybe that puts them in good graces with them or not in good graces with them, and the party could go in lots of different directions with that. The party could be in a town where there have been sightings of these particular lycanthropes, and the people are afraid of them. Perhaps there's a stigma against them. And even though they haven't harmed anybody, they've just been hunting and trying to feed themselves, the town wants the party to hunt these people down. And once they do, they just kind of figure out that these people aren't so bad after all. Lots of room for varying personality and storyline is just given here with their lore. They don't even really like to fight in their hybrid or animal forms. They prefer to be great warriors in their humanoid form. They don't even like to pass on their curse. They don't want to create more competition for themselves for territory or prey. It's also just a really cool visual, too. Looking at their stat block, there's not much actually on it which is incredibly interesting. They have lots of different abilities. They're a challenge rating of 4, with a bite attack, a claw attack, a scimitar, and a longbow attack, as well as a multi-attack feature. But they really do. They love to fight, and they're sophisticated warriors, and they will just fight with those scimitars and longbows in their normal humanoid form, or in their hybrid form, which is actually the art in the Monster Manual. It's this humanoid tiger that is wearing a quiver and wielding a longbow with scimitars strapped to their sides and a cloak. They don't really look like lycanthropes. They just look like, a dragonborn. They look like a We talked last week about owl folk and rabbit folk. They look just like tiger folk. And that visual and just the coolness of them makes them great as accompanying NPCs too. NPCs which can just follow along with the party. And heck, there's even rules in the lycanthrope section of the monster manual which allows rules for DMs to allow their players to actually become lycanthropic. They're just really cool creatures with lots of versatility. So next time your party is just heading through a jungle region, just throw a few of these people in there in a cottage. The party might just walk right by the cottage, but think of the role play opportunity, of the accompanying NPC opportunity, of the visual opportunity, all the different things that could pop up just depending on the way that the party chooses to interact with these creatures. An absolutely fascinating thing to just throw in there where, sure, if they don't interact with them much, they could just be a random NPC that they'll never think about again. But if you take the appropriate amount of time as a party, then they get this real deep story, and that would just be so fascinating. I love versatile creatures, and the weretiger certainly is that. But I think that's about enough time spent out here in the jungle in the wilds. Let's head back to the tavern, get some refreshment, and talk about some sports. All right, out here in the tavern. Today's plot hook to close out the show: what would you do if the party had to compete in a sports competition? One of my favorite animes of all time was Hunter x Hunter, and I love the Greed Island arc. There, lots of different things happen, but in one particular circumstance, Gon and the heroes have to retrieve a card from a group of people led by a massive man named Razor. And it all climaxes in a suspenseful dodgeball match. And like only anime can, it turns this dodgeball match into the most suspenseful and impactful thing that you ever could see. It is one of my favorite moments in the whole series. But we could do this in D&D too. And this is a really interesting concept to me. It's a whole different idea of an encounter. It's not really a social encounter. I mean, you're interacting with NPCs if your party is playing on a basketball team, so to speak, against 5 NPCs. I mean, there might be some deception, trying to fake different people out, but it's not really a role-play encounter, but it's not really a combat encounter either. Sure, there's your dexterity and your strength and your constitution for your stamina. Those all might play a role, but it's not dangerous. There's no weapons involved. You're just playing a sport, whether it be dodgeball or hockey or football or soccer or whatever it may be. Now, I don't know off the top of my head any set rules that have been developed. I'm sure there's some stuff out on the DM's Guild which could give you some rules for this particular thing. So that's something you would have to consider as a DM before you actually just dive into it, is exactly how you're going to handle the situations rules-wise. But I just really love the idea of a little bit of a change of pace. Your party comes into a suspenseful situation and they're expecting a fight. They're expecting whenever this NPC challenges them, they're not expecting them to challenge them to a game of cricket. They're expecting to be challenged to a fight to the death, because that's just what we've been trained with for the ways that Dungeons and Dragons work. It does a great job of just subverting expectations and just giving a whole new kind of story point that will just really keep the players on their toes. And it also allows the various party members to actually be involved in different ways. The wizard with their high intelligence can stand with the cleric and their high wisdom on the sidelines, directing and coaching. The barbarian and fighter with their strength, the monk with their dexterity, the high constitution and stamina of the players trying to do defense, and each person has a role in their team's success. It's like a really complex group check for every play. I just think that'd be a fascinating change of pace. I haven't had a chance to actually do this, but I would love to. I think it'd be incredibly fun. But for now, I think we're about out of time for plot hooks this week. Thank you all so much for listening. Be sure to keep checking out our social media. Stay tuned for that new logo. Check out Disaster Hamsters and Oath of Destiny and all our DMs Guild and Patreon content. Y'all all rock. We love you. Thank you so much for all your support. From all of us here at Plot Hooks, me, Samuel, thanks from Becca and Izzy as well. And we will see you all again next week for another episode of Plot Hooks.